The cream-colored envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I finally opened it. Heavy, expensive paper that screamed privilege and perfection. The gold-embossed lettering caught the morning light. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Wellington request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son Marcus Wellington to Miss Sarah Catherine Morrison. My name is Major Lisa Chen. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 12 years, I've been a pilot in the United States Air Force. The woman receiving this invitation, however, felt like someone else entirely. She felt like the ghost of a person I used to be, back when I believed love meant making yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. There was no personal note, no explanation for why they would invite the woman Marcus had spent 2 years calling his biggest mistake. Just a formal invitation to witness what his mother Patricia had undoubtedly orchestrated as the social event of the Virginia Beach season. The rational part of my mind screamed that this was enemy territory. But something quieter whispered this might be my only chance for closure. Not the kind where you cry and plead, but the kind where you simply close a door that should have been locked years ago. The drive from Norfolk Naval Station to the Chesapeake Bay Country Club took 45 minutes through pristine suburbs. Every mile was a journey backward through time, past the life I had almost settled for. The August sun beat down mercilessly, but inside my rental car, I felt a familiar chill, the same one I'd felt the night Marcus gave me his ultimatum. Choose, Lisa. Choose me and a real life, or choose your fantasy of playing pilot. I had chosen the sky. Today, I would find out if it had been worth it. The Chesapeake Bay Country Club rose from manicured grounds like something from a magazine about lives I would never lead. Valets in crisp uniforms moved between gleaming luxury cars. Women in pastel dresses and men in summer suits moved across the emerald lawn like pieces on an elaborate chessboard. I handed my keys to a young valet who looked at my simple navy dress with barely concealed confusion. I wasn't wearing designer creation or dripping in jewelry. I looked exactly like what I was. A woman who had learned that real value couldn't be measured in carats or thread count. The main reception area was a symphony of crystal, white roses, and muted conversations. I recognized many faces from my old life, people who had once included me in their social calculations. Now they glanced at me with polite surprise reserved for unexpected and not entirely welcome guests. Lisa. The voice belonged to Melissa Hartwell, one of Marcus's college friends who had always treated me like an interesting but temporary aberration. She approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I can't believe you came. How? Brave of you. There it was, the word that would define this day. Brave, not kind, not gracious. Brave as if attending my ex-husband's wedding required combat-level courage. Hello, Melissa, I replied, my voice steady. 5 years of military training had taught me how to keep my expression neutral in hostile territory. It's a beautiful day for a wedding. Well, I suppose you'll want to find your seat. I believe they put you somewhere in the back. Of course they had. I was a footnote now, relegated to the margins where uncomfortable reminders belonged. I caught sight of Patricia Wellington across the room, resplendent in cream silk and pearls, holding court near the gift table. Elegant, formidable, possessed of a smile that could cut glass. Our eyes met across the crowded room. Something cold flickered in her gaze. She leaned toward the woman beside her, whispered something, and they both looked in my direction. I didn't need to hear the words. The conversation would be pity mixed with vindication, watching a former rival confirm every prediction about her inevitable failure. I found my assigned seat in the very last row, between strangers who had no idea who I was. The program was expensive perfection. Thick paper, gold foil, a timeline culminating in Marcus promising to love someone who would never ask him to choose between love and dreams. As the string quartet began and guests settled, I felt a familiar sensation. The same feeling in the cockpit during final moments before takeoff, when everything was committed and there was no turning back. The engines were running. The only question was whether I would fly or crash. Behind me, whispers started rippling through the crowd. They had noticed me. The woman who had chosen the sky over the ground, who had wasted Marcus's time with selfish ambitions. They were sharing theories about why I had come, what I hoped to accomplish, whether I was here to cause trouble or witness their triumph. What they didn't understand was that I hadn't come to prove anything to them. I had come to prove something to myself, something about the woman I had become since walking away from their world of careful compromises and predetermined paths. The whispers were about to become something much louder. The whispers started before I had even settled into my seat. They carried across the perfectly arranged rows like smoke, drifting from one cluster of guests to another with practiced efficiency. Is that really her? The voice belonged to Marcus's cousin Jennifer, her tone pitched just loud enough for me to hear. I thought she would have learned to stay away by now. Her companion leaned in closer. Poor Marcus spent 5 years trying to make something of her. All that time wasted on someone who couldn't even commit to being a proper wife. I kept my eyes forward, watching the altar where Marcus would soon promise his life to someone who understood the rules of their world. Someone who knew that dreams were meant to be practical, manageable things that didn't require leaving the safety of what was expected. Every glance in my direction carried the same message. I was the cautionary tale they would tell their daughters about what happened when women reached too high. Patricia Wellington made her entrance then, gliding down the aisle in a performance of maternal perfection. She moved with the confidence of a woman who had orchestrated this entire day to her exact specifications. As she passed my row, she paused. Just for a moment, but long enough for our eyes to meet. Her smile was a masterpiece of public relations training, warm enough for the cameras but cold enough to freeze blood. "Lisa," she said, her voice carrying sweetness with a sharp aftertaste. "Still playing pilot, I see. How? Quaint." The word playing hit like a precision strike. It reduced 12 years of service, thousands of flight hours, and missions that had saved lives to nothing more than an elaborate game of dress-up. "Mrs. Wellington," I replied, my voice steady despite the fire building in my chest. She tilted her head, studying me with the expression she might reserve for an interesting but ultimately harmless insect. "You know, dear, I always wondered what would become of you after. Well, after you chose your path. I do hope it's brought you everything you thought it would." The pause before chosen your path was surgical in its precision. She managed to make it sound like I had chosen poverty, loneliness, and desperate delusion rather than a career serving my country. "It has," I said simply. Patricia's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes. She had expected self-doubt, perhaps, an admission that she had been right all along. When none came, she straightened almost imperceptibly. "Well," she said, the sweetness taking on a sharper edge, "I suppose everyone finds their own definition of success, even if it means spending your life in cargo planes instead of building something meaningful." Cargo planes. The dismissal was so casual, so complete, that it almost took my breath away. In 2 words, she had reduced aircraft capable of carrying 128 troops or 42,000 pounds of humanitarian aid to something barely worth mentioning. "Excuse me," Patricia continued. "I need to greet the important guests." She moved on, leaving behind expensive perfume and the unmistakable message that I was neither important nor truly a guest. I was an obligation, a social loose end that had to be acknowledged but never embraced. The whispers resumed immediately, fed by fresh material from Patricia's public dismissal. Cargo planes, can you imagine? At least Sarah understands what marriage actually means. Some people just never learn to live in the real world. Each comment was designed to cut, to remind me that I had chosen incorrectly, that I was living proof of what happened when women prioritized selfish ambition over supporting a man's dreams. In their carefully constructed narrative, I wasn't a pilot. I was a cautionary tale with wings. I sat in that last row, surrounded by the architecture of their disdain, and felt something familiar settling over me. It was the same cold focus that came during pre-flight checks, when every system had to be verified before trusting my life to the machinery. They saw a woman who had failed at the most basic requirements of her gender. What they didn't understand was that they were looking at someone who had learned to navigate by instruments when visibility was zero, who had made life-or-death decisions at 30,000 feet, who had brought planes home through storms that would have terrified most of the people now judging her choices. The ceremony was about to begin, and Marcus would soon make his entrance. But first, the whispers had one more round to complete their mission of reminding me exactly where I stood in their world. They had no idea what was about to happen to theirs, but before that reckoning could come, I needed to remember exactly how I had arrived at this moment sitting in the back row of a life I had chosen to leave behind. My mind drifted to a different time, a different version of myself who had believed their whispers might actually matter. I was 22 when I first told Marcus I wanted to fly. We were sitting in his apartment near UVA, textbooks scattered across the coffee table, planning a future that seemed as certain as sunrise. He had just gotten his acceptance letter to law school, and I had been staring at the Air Force recruitment brochure I'd hidden between my biology notes for weeks. "You want to do what?" he had asked, looking up from his constitutional law reading with confused amusement. "Fly," I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want to be a pilot." Marcus set down his highlighter and really looked at me then, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "Lisa, that's not realistic. Women don't really do that kind of thing, not successfully anyway." Even then, something in his tone should have warned me. The way he said women like it was a medical condition that prevented certain activities. "Some do," I had said quietly, "and I think I could be one of them." He laughed then, not unkindly, but with patronizing affection. "Sweetheart, you get airsick on commercial flights. Remember the trip to Florida?" That had stung because it was true. But what he didn't understand was that the sickness hadn't come from flying. It had come from being a passenger, from having no control over where I was going or how I got there. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand. "Baby, I love that you dream big, but we need to be practical. I'm going to be working 80-hour weeks as a junior associate. We'll need stability. We'll need you to be the foundation while I build our future." Our future. Even the pronouns had been a trap I hadn't recognized. His mother had reinforced that message at every opportunity. "Lisa, dear," Patricia had said during one memorable dinner, "Marcus needs a partner who understands the demands of his career. Flying airplanes is a lovely hobby, but marriage requires sacrifice, real sacrifice." She had made it sound so reasonable, so mature, as if choosing to clip my own wings was the most natural evolution of love. The irony was that I had tried. For almost a year, I had attempted to mold myself into the shape they wanted. I took cooking classes and learned to arrange flowers. I attended charity luncheons where women discussed their husbands' achievements as if they were their own. But late at night, when Marcus was asleep beside me, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling and feel like I was suffocating. The life we were building felt like a beautiful prison, all silk wallpaper and golden bars. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in spring. I was folding Marcus's shirts when the radio mentioned a story about the first all-female crew to fly a humanitarian mission into a disaster zone. I stopped folding and turned up the volume. The pilot being interviewed had a voice like clear water, steady and sure, as she described navigating through a storm to deliver medical supplies to earthquake victims. She talked about the weight of responsibility, the precision required, the profound satisfaction of using her skills to save lives. That was the moment I knew. Not suspected, not wondered, but knew with absolute certainty that I had been trying to bury something essential about myself. I left the laundry half-folded and drove straight to the Air Force recruitment office. Marcus found out that evening when I told him over dinner at our favorite restaurant. I had chosen the location carefully, thinking the public setting would keep his reaction measured. I was wrong. "You did what?" His voice carried across the dining room like a gunshot. "I enlisted," I repeated, my hands steady despite the storm in my chest. "I leave for basic training in 8 weeks. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at me as if I had announced my intention to join a cult. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold in a way I had never heard before. "You enlisted," without discussing it with me, without considering what this does to our plans, our engagement, our entire future. "I did consider it," I said quietly. "That's exactly why I did it. That was the night he gave me the ultimatum that would define everything that came after. Choose him and a real life, or choose my fantasy of playing pilot. He made it sound so simple, so black and white, as if love and dreams couldn't coexist in the same heart. I had chosen to fly. And now, 5 years later, sitting in the back row of his wedding to someone who would never ask him to choose, I finally understood that it had been the only choice that would have let me live with myself. The processional was beginning, and soon Marcus would walk down that aisle to marry his perfect compromise. But as the final guests found their seats and the string quartet prepared for the bride's entrance, I sensed someone approaching from behind. "Lisa." The voice behind me was achingly familiar, carrying the same confident tone that had once convinced me I was lucky to be chosen by someone so sure of himself. "I can't believe you actually came." I turned slowly, and there he was. Marcus Wellington, resplendent in his tailored morning coat, looking every inch the successful attorney his mother had always envisioned. 5 years had been kind to him, silver at his temples, the kind of careful fitness that came from expensive personal trainers rather than military PT. "Hello, Marcus," I said, my voice steady despite the sudden acceleration of my heartbeat. "Congratulations." He glanced around nervously, clearly aware that his bride-to-be was probably wondering why he was talking to the woman relegated to social Siberia. "Thank you. I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." Neither was I, honestly. For a moment, something flickered across his face, regret, maybe, or curiosity about the road not taken, but it vanished quickly, replaced by polished composure. "You look different, harder somehow." I almost laughed, as if the softness he had once loved in me had been some kind of character flaw. "The military will do that to you." "Right, the military." He said it like someone might say the circus. "I heard you actually went through with it, all the way through pilot training and everything." There it was, that tone of amazed condescension, as if completing one of the most rigorous training programs in the world was roughly equivalent to learning to juggle. "I did," I replied simply. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "And you're happy, really happy, flying cargo planes instead of building something real?" The question hung between us like smoke. He genuinely couldn't understand how I could choose purpose over comfort, mission over security, the vast open sky over the beautiful cage he had offered. "I'm fulfilled," I said carefully. "I serve something bigger than myself. I save lives. I bring people home. But you're alone." The words came out sharper than intended. You're 34, Lisa. You should have a family, children, a real life. A real life. There it was the fundamental disagreement that had torn us apart. In Marcus's world, real life meant marriage, children, and careful accumulation of social status. I have a life, I said quietly. Just not the one you wanted me to have. His jaw tightened. I wanted us to build something together, a partnership, a future our children could be proud of. You wanted a supporting actress in the Marcus Wellington show. I corrected, my voice calm but carrying steel. You wanted someone who would make you look good at firm parties. That's not fair. When was the last time you asked me about my job, Marcus? When was the last time you showed even slight curiosity about what I actually do? He opened his mouth, then closed it. We both knew the answer. At that moment, a vision in ivory silk appeared at his elbow. Sarah Morrison, everything I had never been and everything Marcus had always wanted. Blonde where I was brunette, soft where I had grown strong, perfectly content to orbit his son rather than burn with her own fire. Darling, she said, her voice a musical whisper carrying gentle possession. The photographer is waiting. She looked at me with polite interest one might show a mildly exotic museum exhibit. You must be Lisa. Marcus told me so much about you. I seriously doubted that, but I smiled anyway. Congratulations, Sarah. I hope you'll be very happy together. Oh, we will be, she said with absolute confidence. Marcus and I want exactly the same things. It makes everything so much simpler. Marcus looked slightly uncomfortable, but Sarah continued with oblivious cruelty. I think it's so brave of you to come today. It must be difficult seeing what you gave up, but I'm sure you found happiness in your career. Flying cargo planes must be fulfilling in its own way. The dismissal was perfectly executed, so sweetly delivered it took my breath away. She had reduced my service, my sacrifice, my entire adult life to a consolation prize for losing the real competition. It is, I said simply, because there was no point explaining to someone who would never understand that some prizes weren't worth winning. Marcus touched Sarah's elbow. We should go, sweetheart. As they turned to leave, he looked back over his shoulder. I hope you find what you're looking for, Lisa, but we both knew I already had. The question was whether he would ever find what he didn't even know he was missing. The organ began to play, and Marcus walked away to marry his beautiful compromise, leaving me alone with the growing certainty that something was about to shift in their perfect day. But as I watched him disappear into the procession of perfectly orchestrated happiness, something inside me began to crumble. I slipped out during the opening hymn, my footsteps muffled by the soaring choir voices. The garden behind the country club was empty, a manicured paradise of roses and trimmed hedges. I found a wrought iron bench beneath an ancient oak and sat down heavily, finally allowing the weight of the day to settle on my shoulders. The laughter and music from the reception hall drifted through the evening air like ghosts of a life I had never lived. Through the tall windows, I could see the golden glow of chandeliers, elegant silhouettes of guests raising champagne flutes. It was everything I had walked away from, and for the first time in 5 years, I wondered if they were right. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe I was just a stubborn woman clinging to fantasies while real life passed me by. 34 years old and sitting alone while my ex-husband married someone who knew how to be what a man needed. The doubt crept in like fog, thick and suffocating. I thought about my apartment back at Norfolk sparse, functional, containing little more than uniforms and flight manuals. The empty weekends, missed holidays, my mother's increasingly strained voice asking when I might finally settle down. My phone buzzed. The caller ID showed a Virginia number I didn't recognize. Major Chen. The voice was young, male, tinged with an accent I couldn't place. This is Major Chen. Ma'am, this is Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, 86th Airlift Wing. I'm sorry to bother you on a Saturday evening, but I wanted to thank you. I straightened slightly, confusion cutting through the self-doubt. Thank me for what, Sergeant? For bringing us home, ma'am, from Kabul, 3 months ago. You were the pilot on our bird during the evacuation when everything went to hell. The memory hit me like a physical blow. August. The chaotic final days of the Afghanistan withdrawal. Mission after mission into Hamid Karzai International Airport while mortars fell around the perimeter. I remember, I said quietly. Ma'am, my squad talks about that flight all the time. The way you brought that bird down through the smoke, with small arms fire coming from the terminal roof. You got us all out safe when everyone said the runway was too dangerous. The garden around me seemed to shift. I remembered that flight, the weight of 200 souls behind me, the terrible responsibility of their lives in my hands. In the cockpit, there had been only the familiar comfort of instruments and procedures. We weren't supposed to make it out that day, Jake continued, his voice thick with emotion. Command was talking about scrubbing all flights, but you said you could get us home, and you did. I closed my eyes, remembering the calculations I had run: wind speed, approach angle, the narrow window between incoming fire and mechanical failure, the absolute certainty that had settled over me as I committed to the landing. That's what we do, Sergeant. Yes, ma'am, but I'm getting married next month. My fiancé's been planning this wedding for 2 years, and I almost wasn't here for it. All of that exists because you brought us home. The words hit me like a revelation. While I had been questioning every choice I had ever made, somewhere in Virginia, a young couple was planning their future because I had done my job, because I had chosen the sky over safety. Sergeant, where are you calling from? Langley Air Force Base, ma'am. I'm pulling duty tonight, and I just wanted you to know that what you do matters, that you matter. I looked up at the darkening sky, at the first stars becoming visible through the oak branches. Somewhere up there, other pilots were flying other missions, carrying precious cargo through dangerous skies. Thank you, Sergeant Morrison, I said. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that tonight. After I hung up, I sat in the garden for a few more minutes, listening to the distant music and feeling something settle back into place inside my chest. The doubt hadn't vanished entirely, but it no longer felt like drowning. It felt like whether something to be navigated rather than surrendered to. When I finally stood up and walked back toward the reception hall, my steps were steady and sure. I had been reminded of something important, something I had forgotten while sitting in that back row listening to their whispers. I knew exactly who I was, and I was about to show them. But first, I needed to make one more call. The revelation from Jake's words was still settling in my chest like armor clicking into place, but there was something else I needed to do before I could face that reception hall again. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Captain Mike Reaper Rodriguez, my co-pilot and closest friend in the squadron. He answered on the second ring. Chen, what's up? Thought you were at some fancy wedding today. I am, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Mike, I need a favor, a big one. Name it. I took a deep breath, the idea forming even as I spoke it. Remember that flyover we talked about for the Veterans Day ceremony? How would you feel about moving it up, like to today, in about an hour? There was a pause on the other end. Then Mike's voice came back, tinged with curiosity. Lisa, what the hell are you up to? Something I should have done a long time ago, I said. Mike, I'm sitting at my ex-husband's wedding, and these people think what we do is playing dress up. They think cargo planes are a consolation prize for women who couldn't handle real life. Another pause, longer this time. When Mike spoke again, his voice carried the edge it got when someone questioned our capabilities. How many birds do you want? 4 would be perfect. C-130s if we can manage it. And Mike, I need a message, something visible. What kind of message? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of Jake's gratitude, the memory of that desperate flight out of Kabul. Thank you, Commander Lisa. Commander, Lisa, you're a major. I know, but that's what they need to see. That the woman they've been dismissing all day isn't some failed housewife playing pilot. She's an officer who's earned her place in the sky. Mike was quiet for a moment. You know this is completely against protocol, right? Unauthorized flyovers using military assets for personal business. I know. And you know if this goes sideways, we're both looking at serious disciplinary action. I know that too. Good, he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. Because I'm in. Jake Morrison called me about an hour ago, actually. Told me he'd just talked to the pilot who saved his squad in Kabul. Said he wanted to do something special for you. My breath caught. He what? Kid's got initiative. He's already been working the phones, calling in favors. Apparently, you made quite an impression during that evacuation. Half the squadron's been talking about putting together some kind of tribute. I felt something warm spread through my chest. It was the sensation of being seen, truly seen by the people who mattered. So here's what we're going to do, Mike continued, his voice taking on the crisp efficiency of a mission briefing. 4 birds, formation flight, smoke trail message. I've got Rodriguez, Martinez, and Thompson on standby. We can be airborne in 30 minutes. Mike, I can't ask you to risk your careers for this. You're not asking, we're volunteering. Lisa, do you have any idea how many lives you've saved, how many missions you've flown? I thought about the answer. Dozens of missions, hundreds of passengers, thousands of pounds of humanitarian aid delivered to places where hope had almost died, medical evacuations, refugees carried to safety, soldiers brought home to families. Some, I said quietly. Some, she says, Mike snorted. Lisa, you're not just a pilot, you're the pilot, the one they call when the mission is impossible. And if your fancy wedding guests can't see that, then we're going to help them see it. I found myself smiling for the first time all day, a real smile that started somewhere deep in my chest. What's the plan? Simple. 4-ship formation, low and slow over your location. Smoke trails spelling out the message. Should be visible for miles. What's the address? I gave him the coordinates for the Chesapeake Bay Country Club, my heart hammering with anticipation and terror. This was either going to be the most beautiful vindication of my life or the most spectacular way to end my career. Mike, yeah, thank you for believing in me, for having my back. Always, Chen, that's what family does. Family, the word hit me like a revelation. These weren't just colleagues. They were my chosen family, the people who understood what it meant to serve something bigger than yourself. Eat at 20 minutes, Mike said. Think you can keep those wedding guests entertained until then? I looked back toward the reception hall, where the celebration was in full swing. Through the windows, I could see Marcus and Sarah in their first dance, surrounded by admiring faces. I think I can manage that, I said. As I hung up and walked back toward the hall, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just confidence, but certainty. I was exactly where I needed to be, exactly when I needed to be there. The sky was about to remind everyone who really owned it. But as I approached the reception hall, I realized I had 20 minutes to fill before my squadron arrived. 20 minutes to blend back into their world, while 4C-130 is prepared to shatter their perfect evening. The transformation from the garden to the reception was like stepping through a portal. The hall blazed with warm light, crystal chandeliers casting rainbow fragments across the polished dance floor. The air was thick with expensive perfume, aged whiskey, and the kind of confidence that came from never worrying about anything more serious than which charity gala to attend next. I slipped back into the crowd, moving through clusters of guests with the same careful navigation I used in hostile airspace. Lisa. Melissa Hartwell materialized beside me, her champagne flute raised like a weapon. There you are. We were all wondering where you disappeared to. Not having second thoughts, I hope. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass, but I found myself strangely calm. The doubt that had consumed me in the garden was gone, burned away by Jake's gratitude and Mike's unwavering loyalty. "Just getting some air," I replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "Oh, good. Between you and me, I think Marcus was worried you might cause some kind of scene." She leaned in conspiratorially. "The bitter ex-wife thing, declaring your undying love, that sort of melodrama." I took a sip of champagne, watching her over the rim of my glass. In exactly 18 minutes, 4 of the most powerful aircraft in the United States Air Force were going to pass directly over this building. "I think Marcus is exactly where he belongs," I said truthfully. "And so am I." Before Melissa could respond, Patricia Wellington swept over, her cream silk gown rustling like predatory wings. She looked flushed with triumph, the satisfaction of a woman who had successfully orchestrated every detail of a perfect social performance. "Lisa, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth, "I'm so glad you stayed for the reception. I know this must be difficult for you, but I think it's important to have closure, don't you?" Closure. As if my entire adult life could be reduced to a therapeutic exercise, a necessary step in accepting my failure to live up to their expectations. "Absolutely," I agreed. "Sometimes you need to see something clearly to understand what it really is." Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she sensed hidden meaning but couldn't identify the threat. "Well, I do hope you'll find someone eventually, someone more suitable to your circumstances." The insult was delivered with surgical precision. Someone suitable to my circumstances, meaning someone desperate enough to overlook my fundamental failure as a woman. "I'm sure I will," I said, checking my watch discreetly. 15 minutes. The band struck up a waltz, and couples drifted toward the dance floor. Marcus and Sarah moved together with practiced elegance, her white dress flowing around them like seafoam. They looked like figures on a wedding cake, perfect and untouchable and utterly without substance. I found myself studying the other guests as they watched the happy couple. These were people who measured worth in stock portfolios and country club memberships, who saw marriage as a strategic merger rather than a joining of souls. "Excuse me." A young man in a waiter's uniform appeared at my elbow. "Ms. Chen, there's a phone call for you at the front desk." I followed him through the crowd, aware of curious glances trailing in my wake. The front desk was tucked into an alcove near the main entrance, away from the reception noise. "Major Chen." The voice on the hotel phone was crisp, professional. "This is tower control at Langley. We have 4 birds requesting permission for a flyover of your location. The flight leader says you'll know what it's about." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Permission granted." "Roger that, ma'am. Ida, 5 minutes. Fair warning, they're planning something visible. You might want to get your guests outside." 5 minutes. I hung up and stood for a moment in the quiet alcove, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. In 5 minutes, everything would change. The careful social architecture that had defined this day would crumble under the roar of 4 Pratt and Whitney engines, and the simple truth written in smoke across the Virginia sky. I walked back toward the reception hall, my steps measured and deliberate. The guests were still dancing, still laughing, still secure in their belief that their world was the only one that mattered. They had no idea what was coming. I moved through the reception like a ghost, invisible among the swirling gowns and perfectly pressed tuxedos. The champagne in my hand had grown warm, but I held onto it like a prop while my mind counted down the minutes. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Marcus was holding court near the bar, his arm around Sarah's waist as he regaled admirers with some story about his latest legal victory. His voice carried that confident boom of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. "The key to corporate litigation," he was saying, gesturing expansively, is understanding that it's not about justice. It's about leverage. Finding the pressure point that makes your opponent realize they can't afford to fight you. The men around him nodded sagely, as if he had shared profound wisdom rather than simply describing strategic bullying. Sarah gazed up at him with adoring attention. 3 minutes and 45 seconds. I drifted closer, drawn by some masochistic impulse to hear more. Marcus was in his element, surrounded by people who understood that power was currency to be displayed. Take my ex-wife, for instance, Marcus continued, apparently unaware I was within earshot. She never understood that concept, always wanted to fight battles she couldn't win, chase dreams that made no practical sense. Sometimes you have to cut your losses and invest in something with actual potential. The casual cruelty took my breath away. He was talking about me like a failed stock pick, a poor investment decision he had wisely corrected. The men chuckled appreciatively. Sarah squeezed his arm possessively. Well, I think everything happens for a reason. If she hadn't left, you wouldn't have been free to find me. 3 minutes. I turned away before I could hear Marcus's response. My jaw clenched. The casual dismissal, the reduction of 12 years of service to nothing more than a character flaw, it crystallized everything I had felt sitting in that back row earlier. But now, instead of doubt, I felt cold, clear satisfaction. I knew exactly what was about to happen to their carefully constructed evening. I found myself near the French doors leading to the terrace, close enough to step outside when the time came. 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Patricia Wellington appeared at my elbow. "I hope you're enjoying yourself, dear," she said, though her tone suggested she hoped nothing of the sort. "It's so important to show grace in these situations." "It's been enlightening," I replied honestly. "Good, I do think closure is so important for people in your situation." She paused delicately. "I understand from Marcus that you're still pursuing that pilot hobby of yours." Hobby, the word hung in the air like a loaded weapon. "Something like that," I said, checking my watch one final time. 1 minute and 30 seconds. Patricia followed my gaze, her expression puzzled. "Are you expecting someone, dear? You seem distracted." I looked at her then, really looked at her. This woman who had spent the entire day treating me like a failed experiment. In 90 seconds, she was going to discover exactly what she had been dismissing. "Actually," I said, moving toward the French doors, "I think we should step outside. The evening air is lovely, and I have a feeling there's going to be something worth seeing." Patricia frowned but followed me onto the terrace, along with several other guests who had overheard. The night was clear and cool, stars just beginning to appear above the Chesapeake Bay. 45 seconds. I could hear it now, just at the edge of perception. A low rumble that might have been distant thunder, if thunder came with the precise mechanical rhythm of synchronized aircraft engines. The sound grew stronger, more distinct. 20 seconds. Other guests were beginning to notice, their conversations faltering as they turned their faces skyward. Someone inside called out, drawing more people toward the windows. Marcus appeared in the doorway, Sarah clinging to his arm, both looking puzzled. 10 seconds. The rumble had become a roar, unmistakable now as heavy aircraft approaching fast and low. I stood perfectly still on the terrace, my heart hammering with anticipation, and waited for my squadron to remind everyone exactly who owned the sky. The sound was building to a crescendo, and in a few seconds, everything would change. Then, suddenly, they appeared. 4 C-130 Hercules aircraft burst over the tree line in perfect formation, their massive frames blocking out the stars as they thundered across the night sky at barely 500 feet. The sound was overwhelming, a primal roar that shook the very foundations of the country club. Windows rattled. Car alarms shrieked in the parking lot. Crystal champagne flutes vibrated against each other in a tinkling symphony of fear. Every conversation died instantly. Every head turned skyward. The elegant guests who had spent the evening discussing stock portfolios now stood frozen, staring at the mechanical beasts that owned the darkness above them. "What the hell is that?" Someone shouted, but their voice was lost in the thunder of 4 turboprops at full power. I remained perfectly still, a calm center in the chaos. This was my element, the sound of American air power cutting through the night. While everyone else cowered, I felt a profound sense of homecoming. The lead aircraft banked slightly, and I caught a glimpse of the pilot. Even from this distance, I knew it was Mike. He waggled the wings once a greeting meant specifically for me. "Lisa." Patricia Wellington grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "What is this? Do you know what's happening?" I looked down at this woman who had spent the day treating me like a failed experiment. Her face was pale with terror, her composure finally cracked. "Military aircraft," I said calmly. "C-130 Hercules, cargo planes." The irony wasn't lost on me. The same aircraft she had dismissed as consolation prizes were now inspiring the kind of awe usually reserved for natural disasters. Marcus appeared beside his mother, Sarah clinging to his arm. His face had gone white, his confident voice reduced to a strangled whisper. "Are we under attack?" Before I could answer, the lead aircraft began to trail white smoke from its wings. The other 3 followed suit, their formation precise as a surgeon's blade. The crowd pressed forward as the smoke began to form shapes against the dark canvas. Letters, words, a message written in the sky by pilots who understood that some truths could only be expressed at altitude. THONKYOUCOMMNDERLISA. The letters hung in the air like accusations, white against black, impossible to ignore. Each word was perfectly formed, a testament to the skill of pilots who could spell out gratitude while flying at 200 miles per hour in formation. The silence that followed was deafening. Even after the aircraft had passed, the guests remained frozen, staring at the message that blazed across the Virginia sky like divine judgment. "Commander!" Marcus's voice was barely audible. "Commander Lisa." I turned to face him, this man who had asked me to choose between love and purpose, who had reduced my service to a hobby. "Major, actually," I said quietly. "Major Lisa Chen, United States Air Force, but Commander works too." The crowd began to buzz with conversation as guests pulled out phones and began frantically typing. Google searches for Major Lisa Chen. The viral wildfire of recognition spreading through the reception like a plague of truth. Patricia Wellington stood perfectly still, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The woman who had dismissed my pilot hobby was now staring at proof that the Air Force had just honored me with a tribute visible for miles. Sarah was the first to speak, her voice small and uncertain. "Those planes, they came here for you. They came here because of what I do," I corrected gently. "Because of missions flown and lives saved. Because of cargo planes that bring people home when everyone else says it can't be done." The message in the sky was beginning to fade now, the smoke dispersing on the evening breeze. But the truth it had written would linger long after the last traces disappeared. I looked around at the assembled guests, at their faces full of dawning realization and uncomfortable shame. These people who had spent the day whispering about my failures now understood they had been in the presence of something they couldn't buy or inherit. Honor earned in the sky above battlefields they would never see. As the last traces of smoke dispersed into the Virginia night, something fundamental had shifted in the carefully ordered universe of their perfect wedding. The silence that followed the flyover was different from any quiet I had ever experienced. It was the sound of assumptions crumbling, of narratives being rewritten in real time. Marcus stood frozen beside his new bride, his face a mask of stunned comprehension. For 5 years of marriage, he had never asked what I actually did during those long deployments. He had been content to dismiss my service as an elaborate form of rebellion, a stubborn refusal to embrace the conventional life he offered. Now, staring at the sky where my squadron had just written their gratitude in smoke, he was finally seeing the woman he had never bothered to know. All those times, he began, his voice barely audible above the murmur of guests. All those missions you mentioned, you were actually saving lives, I finished quietly. Flying into places most people only see on the news, bringing home soldiers who wouldn't have made it otherwise. Sarah looked between us, her perfect composure finally showing cracks. The woman who had dismissed my career as flying cargo planes was beginning to understand that those cargo planes carried hope to places where hope was the difference between life and death. The crowd around us was transforming before my eyes. Guests who had whispered about my failures were now frantically Googling my name on their phones. I could see the search results reflecting in their faces news articles about humanitarian missions, citations for valor, photographs of C-130s landing in war zones with American flags painted on their tails. Major Lisa Chen, Air Force Cross recipient, someone read aloud from their phone, their voice cutting through the stunned conversations. Credited with saving over 400 lives during Operation Allies Refuge in Afghanistan. The Air Force Cross. I had never mentioned that to Marcus, never told him about the mission that had earned me the nation's second highest decoration for valor. He was learning about it now, along with everyone else, from a stranger reading Wikipedia on their phone. Patricia Wellington had gone completely silent, her face pale, as she processed the implications of what she had just witnessed. The woman who had spent the day treating me like a social embarrassment was now calculating the social cost of having publicly dismissed a decorated war hero. In her world, optics were everything, and the optics of this moment were devastating. "I don't understand," she said finally, her voice small and confused. If you've done all these things, why didn't you ever say anything?" I looked at her, this woman who had made it clear from the moment I met her that my worth would be measured by my ability to enhance her son's status, not by any achievements of my own. "When would I have said it?" I asked. "During the engagement party where you introduced me as the girl Marcus is experimenting with? Or maybe at the family dinner where you explained that real women build homes, not careers?" The memory hung between us like an accusation. Patricia's face flushed with the kind of embarrassment that came from having your own words thrown back at you in front of an audience. A young woman I didn't recognize approached tentatively, her phone still glowing in her hand. "Excuse me," she said, her voice filled with genuine awe. "Are you really the pilot who flew the last evacuation flight out of Kabul? The one they made the documentary about?" Documentary. I had forgotten about that. A filmmaker had followed several evacuation crews during the final chaotic days of the Afghanistan withdrawal. The resulting film had aired on PBS, focusing on the ordinary people who had done extraordinary things during those desperate weeks. "One of them," I said simply. "My brother was on that flight," she continued, her eyes bright with tears. "He was a translator who had worked with American forces. They told him he wouldn't make it out, that the airport was too dangerous. But you came back. You came back for one more load when everyone else said it was impossible." The memory hit me like a physical blow. That final flight, the runway under mortar fire, the desperate faces of Afghan allies who had risked everything to help American forces, the weight of knowing that leaving them behind was a death sentence. We had been ordered to abort the mission, but something in those faces had made the decision for me. "We don't leave people behind," I said, the words catching slightly in my throat. Marcus was staring at me now with an expression I had never seen before. Not love that ship had sailed years ago, but something deeper. Recognition, perhaps. Or maybe just the dawning realization of how completely he had misunderstood the person he had shared a bed with for 5 years. The young woman pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. A group of Afghan families standing in front of an American flag, smiling despite everything they had lost. "These are some of the families who made it out because of pilots like you," she said. "They're all safe now, living in Virginia, starting new lives." I studied the faces in the photographed children who would grow up free, mothers who wouldn't have to fear for their daughters' futures, men who had risked everything to help American forces and lived to see their courage rewarded. This was what service looked like. Not the abstract concept of duty that people like Patricia discussed at charity galas, but the concrete reality of lives saved and futures made possible. The party continued around us, but something essential had changed. The whispers now carried a different tone, not dismissal, but a kind of uncomfortable respect. These people were realizing they had spent an entire day in the presence of something they had never encountered before. Authentic heroism, earned not through inheritance or social climbing, but through sacrifice and service. As the evening wound down and guests began to drift away, I found myself standing alone on the terrace once more. But this time, the solitude felt different. It wasn't the isolation of being unwanted or misunderstood. It was the quiet satisfaction of truth finally being seen. The country club staff moved efficiently through the reception hall, clearing champagne flutes and folding linens with practiced discretion. Through the tall windows, I could see the last clusters of guests lingering in animated conversation, their phones still glowing as they shared photos and videos of the flyover that would be trending on social media before the night was over. "Lisa." Marcus's voice came from behind me, soft and uncertain. I turned to find him standing in the doorway, his bow tie undone, his perfect composure finally cracked. Sarah was nowhere to be seen. "Beautiful evening," I said, gesturing toward the clear sky where the last traces of my squadron's message had finally faded. He stepped onto the terrace, keeping careful distance between us. "I never knew," he said, the words barely audible. "All those deployments, all those times you were gone for weeks. I never asked what you were actually doing." "No," I agreed. "You never did." The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of 5 years of willful ignorance. Marcus had been content to see my service as an inconvenience, a phase I would eventually outgrow when I realized what really mattered. He had never wanted to know the details because the details might have complicated his narrative. "The Air Force Cross," he said finally. "When did that happen?" 3 years ago. You were at a golf tournament in Pebble Beach." I remembered that weekend clearly. I had been recovering from the mission that earned me the decoration and emergency medical evacuation from a forward operating base under heavy fire. Marcus had been annoyed that I couldn't accompany him to what he called an important networking opportunity. The irony hadn't been lost on me then. "I should have been there," he said, though we both knew he wouldn't have been, even if he had known. "You were exactly where you wanted to be." Another silence. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from our early days together. Now he seemed to be grappling with the realization that he had never actually known the woman he had promised to love and honor. "Sarah saw the documentary," he said suddenly. "The one about the Kabul evacuation. She's been watching it on her phone. There's a whole segment about you, about that last flight you made." I waited for him to continue, curious about what his new wife thought of the woman she had dismissed so casually hours earlier. "She's in the bridal suite crying," Marcus continued. She keeps saying she didn't know, that she never would have said those things if she had understood what you actually do. What I actually do, I repeated. Not who I actually am, what I do. The distinction was important. Even now, faced with undeniable evidence of my service, they were still reducing me to my function rather than seeing me as a complete person. I was impressive because of my achievements, not worthy because of my inherent value. That's not what I meant, Marcus said quickly, but we both knew it was exactly what he meant. A burst of laughter drifted from the reception hall, where the remaining guests were undoubtedly dissecting the evening's events. By morning, the story would have evolved, been refined and retold until it became legend. The wedding where a decorated war hero showed up her ex-husband with a military flyover. "I need to ask you something," Marcus said, his voice taking on the careful tone he used when negotiating difficult contracts. "Did you plan this? The flyover, the timing, all of it?" I considered the question. Had I planned it, or had I simply recognized an opportunity when Jake Morrison's phone call reminded me of what I had forgotten sitting in that garden, questioning every choice I had ever made? "I called in a favor," I said finally, "from people who understand what service actually means. To embarrass me, to embarrass my family." The assumption was so fundamentally wrong, so completely centered on his perspective that I almost laughed. Even now, faced with evidence of my worth, he couldn't conceive of a world where my actions weren't somehow about him. "Marcus," I said, turning to face him fully, "not everything is about you. I didn't do this to embarrass you. I did it to remind myself of who I am. By humiliating me in front of 300 guests. By letting the truth speak for itself." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with the cognitive dissonance of trying to reconcile the woman he thought he had known with the reality of who I actually was. "I'm sorry," he said finally, though I wasn't sure what exactly he was apologizing for. The years of dismissal, the casual cruelty, the fundamental failure to see me as anything more than an accessory to his life. "I know you are," I replied, "but sorry doesn't change anything." A cool breeze swept across the terrace, carrying with it the scent of honeysuckle and the distant sound of car engines as the last guests finally departed. The perfect wedding was officially over, and Marcus would have to return to his bride and explain why his ex-wife had just upstaged their entire celebration. "Will I see you again?" he asked, though we both knew the answer. I doubt it. I walked past him toward the exit, my steps steady and sure. Behind me, I could hear him sinking into one of the wrought iron chairs, the weight of understanding finally settling on his shoulders. The valet brought my rental car around, and as I drove away from the Chesapeake Bay Country Club, I caught a glimpse of Marcus in my rearview mirror, still sitting alone on the terrace. But I didn't look back again. Some chapters close with dramatic confrontations, others with quiet understanding. This one ended with the simple act of driving away from a life that had never truly been mine. The Virginia highways stretched ahead of me, empty and peaceful in the late evening darkness. My phone buzzed with notifications, social media mentions, news outlets picking up the story, messages from squadron mates, but I let them wait. For now, I wanted nothing more than the silence of the road and the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. 6 months later, I received a letter that changed everything. It arrived bearing the official seal of the Pentagon. Inside was a promotion order, Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Chen, effective immediately, along with assignment to command the 86th Airlift Wing's new Humanitarian Operations Division. Attached was a handwritten note from Jake Morrison. "Ma'am, the video of your wedding flyover has been viewed over 2 million times. Recruitment offices are reporting a surge in women wanting to become pilots. You changed more than just one evening. You changed the future. I read those words 3 times before their meaning sank in. The truth I had written across that Virginia sky had rippled outward in ways I never could have imagined. Somewhere, young women were looking up at aircraft and seeing possibilities. That afternoon, my assistant knocked on my office door. "Colonel Chen, there's someone here to see you," says she drove down from D.C. A young woman in her early 20s stood in my doorway, nervous but determined. Her handshake was firm, her eye contact direct. "Ma'am, my name is Sarah Morrison. I saw the video of your flyover. I've been thinking about joining the Air Force, but I wasn't sure if someone like me could really make it as a pilot." Someone like her. I knew exactly what she meant. Someone who had been told her dreams were impractical, that the sky was for other people. "What made you decide to come here?" I asked. She smiled, and I saw something familiar in her expression, the same determination I had felt walking into that recruitment office years ago. "I realized that if you could command the sky well enough to write a message in it, maybe I could learn to do the same. Maybe the only person who gets to decide what I'm capable of is me." We talked for an hour about flight school, about missions that mattered, about the profound satisfaction of bringing people home safely. When she left, she had a recruitment packet and an appointment with the base's aviation career counselor. As I watched her walk away, shoulders squared with purpose, I thought about the woman I had been at the country club. The one who had questioned every choice she had ever made. She seemed like a stranger now. My phone rang. It was Mike Rodriguez, calling from Germany. "Chen, you see the news. 3 more C-130 squadrons just got female commanders. They're calling it the Chen effect." I laughed. "It wasn't a stunt, Mike, it was a reminder." Reminder of what? I looked out my office window at the flight line where aircraft sat ready for their next missions. "That we don't choose the sky because it's easy," I said. "We choose it because it's ours." The sun was setting over the base, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In a few hours, I would be wheels up on a humanitarian mission to deliver medical supplies. It was the kind of flight that would never make headlines, the kind of quiet heroism that happened every day without recognition. But that was exactly as it should be. Real service wasn't about glory or vindication. It was about showing up, doing the job, and bringing people home. It was about choosing purpose over comfort, mission over security, the vast open sky over any beautiful cage. I had chosen my wings long ago, and every day I chose them again. Finding your own wings isn't always easy, and it often means walking away from people who can't understand your flight path. But sometimes the courage to soar comes from realizing that your story isn't defined by those who refuse to see your worth. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own moments of choosing purpose over approval. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this journey of courage and self-discovery, please subscribe to Honor Vindicated for more stories of resilience and strength. Remember, the sky belongs to those brave enough to claim it.